Australia, a continent of extremes. Where rainforests older than the Amazon meet deserts the size of countries. Reefs stretch for thousands of kilometers, and wildlife found nowhere else moves across landscapes shaped by fire, wind, and deep time. Volcanoes, canyons, alpine peaks, and red sand worlds all exist within a single outline on the map. And between them, cities rise on coasts carved by tide and storm. Today, we dive into Australia's most unbelievable locations. Places so vast, remote, and otherworldly that many people never see them at all. How can a country be the sixth largest on Earth and still be the flattest continent ever measured? That contrast is the first clue to how unusual Australia truly is. Its highest peak, Mount Kosciuszko, rises lower than many European mountains, yet just offshore, the land creates the opposite extreme. The Great Barrier Reef, the largest living structure on the planet, and visible from space. Move inland and the scale shifts again. Vast stretches of the outback see fewer than 200 visitors a year, leaving entire regions almost untouched. Life here follows its own rules. More than 80% of Australia's wildlife exists nowhere else, from desert-adapted marsupials to coastal species found only along the narrow edges of the continent. Some human-made features are just as surprising. The dingo fence runs more than 5,600 kilometers, long enough to cut across multiple countries in Europe. Even the climate produces extremes of its own. Each winter, the snowy mountains collect more snow than Switzerland. On Kangaroo Island, kangaroos outnumber people, and across the interior roam the world's largest population of wild camels, thriving in conditions few other animals could endure. The first sign of its scale appears in color. Patches of turquoise, deep blue, and pale green spreading across the ocean in patterns that seem too precise to be natural. From above, the surface looks calm, but everything beneath it is in constant motion. Off the coast of Queensland lies the Great Barrier Reef, a chain of coral systems stretching for more than 2,000 kilometers. Shallow lagoons, submerged sandbanks, and scattered bommies form a landscape built by countless generations of coral growing upward toward the light. Channels cut through the reef in long curves, carrying tides that shift direction with the moon. Below the surface, the terrain changes every few meters. Branching corals rise like forests. Massive boulder corals form rounded cliffs, and soft corals sway with the movement of the water. Schools of fish move in synchronized bursts, while turtles, rays, and reef sharks navigate through deeper passages where light fades into blue. Along the outer edge, waves strike with constant force, marking the boundary between open ocean and the shelter of the reef. Inside the calmer lagoons, the water grows still, revealing intricate structures built layer by layer, each one shaped by time, tide, and the living organisms that form the reef itself. Where land fractures into coves and channels, a city grows in shapes that seem guided more by terrain than by design. Only after entering the landscape does its structure begin to reveal itself. Along Australia's southeast coast lies Sydney, built around a drowned river valley sculpted by sandstone and tide. The harbor cuts deep into the land, forming a maze of headlands and sheltered inlets. Ferries move between them throughout the day, passing cliffs layered in gold and rust. The Pacific presses against the city's edge. Beaches stretch between rocky points, their sand shifting with storms and currents. At the base of cliffs, ocean pools fill with waves that break over their rims. Inland, ridges of sandstone rise into plateaus covered with bushland, shaping suburbs that follow the contours of the slopes. From this terrain, Sydney's skyline emerges. Towers stand along the water, reflecting light across the harbor, while older neighborhoods climb the hills in tight grids and terraces. The island doesn't reveal its scale all at once. At first, it seems defined by coastline and cloud, but as you move inland, new terrains appear. Mountains, forests, high plateaus, and unexpected pockets of wilderness that feel far larger than the map suggests. South of mainland Australia lies Tasmania, separated by the Bass Strait and shaped by ancient geology and shifting climates. The Central Highlands rise into a mosaic of tarns, dolerite columns, and alpine moorland, their slopes descending into deep river valleys and dense temperate rainforest. In the west, weather systems from the Southern Ocean strike the ranges with relentless force, feeding rivers that cut through some of the most remote terrain in the country. Along the east coast, the landscape softens into granite headlands, clear bays, and long white beaches where the water shifts from pale blue to deep green. Inland forests grow thick with myrtle, sassafras, and towering eucalyptus, creating shaded corridors that stay cool even in summer. At first glance, the landscape seems calm. Open plains, distant hills, and a coastline shaped by gentle tides. But the closer you move toward the city's center, the more its structure reveals a deliberate balance between nature and design. On Australia's southern coast lies Adelaide, positioned between the Gulf St. Vincent and the long spine of the Mount Lofty Ranges. The city spreads across a broad plain, its streets arranged in a careful grid, bordered by parklands that form a wide green ring. Beyond these parks, suburbs extend toward the foothills, climbing gradually into winding roads and valleys. The climate is dry and bright. Summers bring heat that settles over the plains, while cool sea breezes sweep across the city in the afternoons. In winter, the hills catch low clouds and rain, feeding creeks that run toward the Gulf. At dawn, the shoreline feels suspended between night and day. Quiet surf, pale light, and silhouettes of headlands that seem carved directly from the sea. The beach appears empty at first, but the landscape shifts quickly as the sun rises. Along the central coast of Queensland lies Cape Hillsborough National Park, a place where rainforest-covered slopes descend straight to the shoreline. Granite headlands frame the bays, their surfaces weathered and fractured, forming cliffs, boulders, and narrow inlets. Mangroves occupy the creeks behind the beaches, holding mudflats that fill and drain with the tide. As the morning light strengthens, the beach becomes active. Kangaroos and wallabies move across the sand, feeding on washed-up seaweed before retreating toward the forest. The tide pulls back to reveal long stretches of reflective sand, tidal pools, and rock formations that jut into the water like scattered outcrops. Inland, walking tracks climb through eucalyptus forest and patches of rainforest, leading to lookouts where the coastline opens into sweeping views of islands, reefs, and distant hills. Before you reach the park itself, the landscape begins to hint at what's ahead. Open woodland giving way to rising stone. Pockets of green hidden in unexpected places, and the sound of water moving long before it becomes visible. The shift feels subtle but unmistakable. In Australia's Northern Territory lies Litchfield National Park, known for its sandstone plateaus, seasonal waterfalls, and deep plunge pools carved into ancient rock. Florence Falls drops in two streams into a clear basin below, surrounded by monsoon forest that stays cool even in the heat. Nearby, Bully Rockhole forms a series of connected pools and cascades, each shaped by the flow of the creek as it cuts through the stone. Wongi Falls offers a wider, more powerful descent, its waters fanning across a curved cliff before pooling in a large forested amphitheater. During the wet season, these waterfalls grow dramatically, feeding creeks that spread across the lowlands. The closer you get, the denser everything becomes, air thickening with moisture, light narrowing into green layers, and the sound of movement coming from places you can't see. The forest doesn't reveal itself all at once. It surrounds you and lets details appear gradually. In far north Queensland lies the Daintree Rainforest, one of the oldest surviving rainforests on Earth. Here, mountains drop sharply toward the Coral Sea, creating a narrow edge where jungle meets shore. Creeks run down from the ranges in clear, fast-moving streams, cutting channels through valleys packed with ferns, vines, and towering trees. The canopy rises in uneven tiers. Fan palms spread wide, circular leaves that catch fragments of sunlight, while strangler figs twist around older trunks, forming pillars that look more like architecture than vegetation. Beneath them, the understory stays dim and humid, alive with insects, frogs, and birds whose calls echo through the forest. The coastline announces its scale in fragments. Wind carving the cliffs, surf exploding against stone, in long stretches of empty horizon that appear suddenly after a bend in the road. The landscape keeps shifting, revealing new shapes every few kilometers. Along the southern edge of Victoria lies the Great Ocean Road, tracing a route between rainforest, headlands, and some of the most dramatic cliffs in the country. The road winds above the shoreline, sometimes only a few meters from waves that crash against sandstone platforms below. In other sections, it climbs toward forested ridges, where eucalyptus trees lean over the asphalt. The cliffs are the defining feature. Layers of limestone rise in pale vertical walls, cut into stacks, arches, and caves by relentless wind and water. The 12 Apostles stand offshore as isolated pillars, separated from the mainland by centuries of erosion. Swells roll in from the Southern Ocean, striking the base of these formations and sending spray high into the air. The water changes before anything else, shifting from deep blue to pale turquoise until the color looks almost weightless. Sandbanks begin to appear beneath the surface, their shapes twisting with each movement of the tide. The islands seem to rise from the light rather than from the sea itself. Off the coast of Queensland lie the Whitsunday Islands, a chain of continental islands formed from the ancient mountain peaks, now surrounded by the Coral Sea. Their shores alternate between dense rainforest slopes and long white beaches made of silica sand so fine it reflects the sun with a distant brightness. Tides carve the landscape daily. Channels between the islands narrow into fast-moving currents, while shallow bays expand and contract, revealing sand patterns that change with every tide cycle. At Whitehaven Beach, swirling inlets create sweeping contrasts of sand and water, shifting continuously as tides pull through Hill Inlet. The island reveals itself in pieces: sheer cliffs on one approach, rolling dunes on another, and stretches of coastline so quiet they feel untouched. Each section looks like it belongs to a different landscape, yet they all meet within a single outline of land. Off the coast of South Australia lies Kangaroo Island, a place shaped by wind, surf, and long periods of isolation. Along the southern edge, the coastline rises into tall limestone cliffs that face the open Southern Ocean. Swells crash against the rock, carving arches, caves, and isolated stacks that stand apart from the mainland of the island. The interior shifts into open plains, dense eucalyptus forest, and pockets of coastal heath. Wildlife moves freely here: kangaroos, wallabies, koalas, and echidnas, appearing in areas where the vegetation thickens around creeks and sheltered valleys. On the western side, remarkable rocks sit atop a granite dome, their massive shapes sculpted by centuries of wind and salt. Nearby, Admiral's Arch frames the ocean through layered rock, carved into a natural window, with waves surging through its base. Where flat plains meet restless weather, a city appears in patterns that shift with light, wind, and season. At first, it seems orderly, but its rhythm changes as soon as you step inside its streets. On Australia's southern coast lies Melbourne, built along the lower reaches of the Yarra River. The water moves quietly through the center, dividing districts of glass towers, old warehouses, and narrow laneways. Bridges cross the river in close intervals, carrying trams and pedestrians between the banks. The land around the city is broad and open, shaped by volcanic plains that stretch far inland. Storms move quickly across this space, bringing sudden rain or sharp afternoon light. In summer, the heat can settle over the city, while winter pushes cold winds from the Southern Ocean. Melbourne's layout grows from this landscape. A strict grid forms the core, but it breaks into tight alleys filled with small shops, arcades, and cafes. Toward the edge of the city, rail yards, ports, and industrial zones spread across the flat terrain. Approaching from the north, the landscape narrows suddenly. Ocean on one side, a wall of forested cliffs on the other. The city feels pressed into a thin strip of land, shaped by geology long before anyone settled here. South of Sydney lies Wollongong, positioned between the Pacific Ocean and the steep escarpment of the Illawarra Range. The cliffs rise sharply behind the city, cut by deep gullies that channel wind and rain toward the coast. Below them, suburbs stretch along the shoreline in long arcs that follow the curve of the beaches and headlands. The coastline is active and changing. Swells roll in from the open Pacific, breaking along sandy stretches and against rocky platforms where tidal pools fill and drain throughout the day. Above the water, the escarpment remains constant, its slopes covered in dense rainforest that thrives on the moisture carried inland from the sea. From a distance, the shoreline looks almost unreal, long, bright, and perfectly straight, with towers rising so close to the sand that they seem balanced on its edge. The city appears built along a boundary where land and water never fully settle. On Australia's eastern coast lies the Gold Coast, stretching along a series of beaches that run for tens of kilometers. The Pacific rolls in with consistent swells, forming sandbars and breaks that shift with tide and storm. Behind the beachfront towers, a network of canals and waterways cuts through flat ground, linking inland lakes to the broad Narong River. The climate gives the region its rhythm. Summers are humid and storm-filled, with lightning storms sweeping quickly across the skyline. Winters are clear and mild, revealing long views toward the hinterland, where rainforest-covered peaks rise abruptly from the plains. Suburbs extend between these two environments, coast and mountains, creating a landscape defined by openness and height. The first thing that stands out is the meeting of elements: long sweeps of coast, exposed headlands, and an industrial skyline that rises beside surf rather than inland. The mix feels unexpected, yet entirely shaped by the land itself. On the central coast of New South Wales lies Newcastle, positioned where the Hunter River meets the Pacific Ocean. The river widens into a deep channel that curves past dunes, wetlands, and breakwalls before reaching the open sea. Coal ships anchor offshore in long lines, waiting to enter the harbor, their silhouettes forming a horizon that shifts with tide and weather. Along the coast, the terrain changes quickly. Sand beaches stretch for kilometers, interrupted by rocky shelves and cliffs where waves break with force. Ocean baths sit at the edge of these cliffs, filled by swells that roll over their walls. Inland, the city rises along low hills, with streets climbing toward lookouts that open into broad views of coastline and river. The coastline appears almost motionless from a distance, pale cliffs, flat horizons, and a quiet sea. But the closer you move, the more you realize everything here is shaped by constant force. The landscape looks permanent, yet it's changing every moment. Along Victoria's southern shore lies the 12 Apostles coastline, where limestone stacks rise from the water in tall, isolated pillars. These formations were once part of the mainland, carved apart by waves that continue to cut into their bases. Each pillar shows layers of sediment pressed together over millions of years, now exposed in vertical bands of cream, gold, and ochre. The Southern Ocean drives the entire system. Swells roll in from far offshore, striking the cliffs with enough power to send spray high above the rim. Wind funnels along the edge, carrying salt through deep notches and overhangs that mark the next stages of erosion. Above the cliffs, a narrow strip of land holds boardwalks and lookouts where the full scale of the coastline becomes clear. Arches collapsing into new stacks, stacks eroding into stumps, and the shoreline retreating bit by bit. The water gives it away before the land does, clear enough to show every sand ripple beneath the surface, shifting from pale green to deep blue in a single curve of the coastline. The island feels exposed yet strangely calm, shaped by wind and shallow sea. Off the coast of Western Australia lies Rottnest Island, a low limestone island formed by ancient dunes that solidified over thousands of years. Its shoreline wraps around a series of bays and coves, each with different shades of water depending on reefs, depth, and sand. Narrow channels cut through these reefs, creating patches of calm water beside areas where waves break in white lines. Inland, the terrain rolls gently. Salt lakes occupy the central part of the island, changing color with salinity and season. Coastal scrub and low woodland stretch across the limestone, interrupted by pockets of open ground where quokkas move through the shade in small groups. From the moment the horizon widens and the light sharpens, the landscape hints at a city standing at the continent's far western edge. Heat, distance, and ocean wind meet here in a way that feels unmistakably remote. On Australia's western shore lies Perth, set between the Indian Ocean and the winding Swan River. The river expands into wide reaches as it nears the city, bordered by cliffs, wetlands, and suburbs that climb the surrounding ridges. Ferries trace steady paths across the water, moving between the bends that shape the urban layout. climate defines the region. Long summers bring dry heat and cloudless skies, while winter fronts roll in from the sea with sudden rain. Beyond the outskirts, scrubland stretches inland toward the desert, its vegetation low and sparse. Heat, light, and open space define the first impression. An atmosphere shaped by the dry tropics, where the landscape feels exposed under a wide, unbroken sky. The terrain appears simple at a distance, but its details reveal sharp contrasts of rock, sea, and vegetation. On the northeastern coast of Australia lies Townsville, positioned where the Ross River meets Cleveland Bay. The coastline forms a broad arc, protected by offshore reefs and bordered by long stretches of sand. Inland, the land rises abruptly into hills of weathered granite, with Castle Hill standing at the center as a massive pink outcrop overlooking the city. The climate brings two distinct rhythms. The dry season stretches long, with clear skies and warm winds, while the wet season arrives in heavy bursts, feeding creeks and turning the ranges green. Suburbs extend across flat ground near the bay, while roads wind toward the foothills and climb along rocky slopes. The landscape begins as quiet bushland, and then the ground suddenly breaks open. Sandstone cliffs rising from the plain, carved into sheer walls that reveal the age and force behind their creation. The shift feels abrupt, as if an entire world has been hidden inside the range. In central Queensland lies Carnarvon National Park, known for its deep gorge systems cut through layers of white, orange, and charcoal-colored sandstone. Carnarvon Gorge forms the centerpiece, a long corridor where towering cliffs narrow around a creek lined with palms, ferns, and pockets of dense vegetation. Cool air lingers in these shaded spaces, contrasting sharply with the dry heat above the rim. Side gorges branch off the main passage, each holding its own patterns: moss-covered rock, clear pools, sculpted chambers, and walls marked with ancient Aboriginal art. Some sections are silent, except for water dripping from overhangs, shaped by centuries of erosion. Where a river twists through rising heat and subtropical light, a city forms along its curves, rather than across a straight plane. The landscape feels fluid, shaped by bends, tidal shifts, and the weight of warm air. Along Australia's northeastern coast lies Brisbane, built around the looping course of the Brisbane River. The water folds back on itself again and again, creating deep bends bordered by cliffs, parks, and dense districts of apartments and offices. Ferries move constantly along the river, tracing the same channels that once carried trade from the inland ranges to the sea. The climate gives the city its pace. Summers bring thick humidity and fast-moving storms that sweep across the skyline. In winter, the air turns clear and mild, opening long views across the ridges. Suburbs climb these ridges in layered streets, while lowland areas follow the river's edge in winding lines. The coastline softens into gentle curves as you approach. Broad beaches, calm river mouths, and headlands that feel shaped more by tide and time than by force. The atmosphere carries a quiet ease, yet the landscape holds plenty of movement. On the northern coast of New South Wales lies Yamba, set where the Clarence River meets the Pacific Ocean. The river widens into a deep estuary lined with breakwalls, inlets, and islands that shift with the tides. Beyond the river mouth, beaches stretch in long, bright arcs toward distant headlands. The rhythm here changes with the water. Swells wrap around the points, forming smooth lines that break along sandbars. Tides move quickly, revealing wide sand flats at low tide and pushing back against the river at high. Fishing boats and trawlers work through the channels, tracing routes shaped by currents and shifting banks. The first impression is contrast. Sharp mountain slopes rising behind a quiet harbor, cold winds drifting across water that reflects the shape of the land above it. Everything feels close together, yet the landscape carries a sense of vastness. On the southeastern edge of Tasmania lies Hobart, set at the mouth of the River Derwent. The river widens into a deep, calm estuary, bordered by docks, coves, and hills that descend sharply toward the shoreline. Mount Wellington dominates the scene, its cliffs and boulder fields towering over the city, often wrapped in shifting clouds or scattered snow. Hobart's climate shapes its rhythm. Winters send cold air from the Southern Ocean, while summers remain mild and bright, with long evenings spreading light across the harbor. Streets run along the base of the mountains and follow the curve of the river, with older districts clustered near the waterfront and newer suburbs stretching into the foothills. The landscape feels layered before you even enter it, wetlands spreading into savanna, stone rising suddenly from floodplains, in a sense that each part of the terrain belongs to a different age. The scale isn't loud, but it expands the farther you look. In Australia's Northern Territory lies Kakadu National Park, a region shaped by monsoon cycles and some of the oldest exposed rocks on the continent. The lowlands hold vast wetlands that shift in size through the year, turning floodplains into mirrors during the wet season and into grasslands as they dry. Waterways wind through these flats, attracting flocks of magpie geese, egrets, and whistling ducks. Above the plains, the Arnhem Land Plateau rises in long, broken escarpments. Its sandstone cliffs and overhangs shelter rock formations weathered into steps, pillars, and boulders. Many of these surfaces hold ancient Aboriginal rock art, preserved across generations and layered with depictions of hunting, ceremonies, and ancestral stories. Billabongs sit at the base of the escarpment, bordered by lilies and paperbark trees, while saltwater crocodiles move through the shaded channels. The landscape announces itself with distance, valleys that drop farther than expected. Ridges that stretch into a blue haze, and an atmosphere that feels suspended between cliff edge and open sky. The scale grows larger the longer you look at it. West of Sydney lies Blue Mountains National Park, a vast sandstone plateau carved into deep gorges and sheer escarpments. The cliffs glow orange at dawn, their surfaces weathered into ledges and overhangs that run for kilometers. From these heights, the Jameson and Gross valleys open into wide basins filled with eucalyptus forest that releases a fine, oily vapor, giving the region its characteristic blue tint. Water shapes the terrain in quieter ways. Streams gather along the plateau, dropping suddenly into waterfalls that disappear into dense canopy below. Places like Wentworth Falls and Govet's Leap reveal narrow ribbons of water falling from great heights, leaving mist drifting upward along the cliff faces. Walking tracks follow old routes along the ridgelines and descend into shaded valleys where tree ferns, moss, and cool air replace the exposed heat above. The landscape feels inverted the moment you arrive. Forests growing in pure sand, lakes forming without rivers, and dunes rising like mountains along a coastline that stretches far beyond sight. It's a place where familiar rules slip a little. Off the coast of Queensland lies Fraser Island, the largest sand island in the world. Longshore currents have built it grain by grain, forming dunes that tower above the ocean and run inland for kilometers. Between these dunes, freshwater lakes appear in bright, clear pools, some perched high above sea level, held in place only by compacted sand and organic matter. The interior is unexpectedly green. Rainforest survives here, despite the sandy base, with satinay and brushbox trees growing tall and conditions that seem too poor to support them. Wallam heathlands cover flatter areas, blooming with color during the warmer months. The air is the first thing you notice, thick, warm, and heavy with the scent of the tropics. Light reflects differently here, sharper and more direct, as if the landscape sits closer to the sun. At the northern edge of Australia lies Darwin, set along a series of bays, mangrove channels, and low headlands that face the Timor Sea. The coastline folds into shallow inlets where tides shift dramatically, exposing mudflats before sweeping back in with force. The city spreads along these edges, its layout shaped by storms, heat, and the need for open space. The climate defines everything. Monsoon rains arrive suddenly, turning streets dark under towering clouds, while the dry season brings clear skies and long stretches of still, bright weather. Tropical vegetation lines the roads and creeks, and wetlands appear just beyond the suburbs, holding water through the wet months and shrinking in the dry. The coastline softens as you approach it, long curves of sand, low headlands, and a sense that the land is easing into the ocean rather than resisting it. Light falls differently here, stretched across the water in broad reflective bands. On Australia's far northeastern edge of New South Wales lies Byron Bay, set around a sweeping arc of beach that leads toward Cape Byron, the easternmost point of the continent. The headland rises gently above the water, its slopes covered in dense coastal forest that meets the cliffs in a sharp, bright line. Offshore, the water shifts from pale turquoise to deeper blue as reefs, sandbars, and channels shape the movement of waves. The atmosphere carries a mix of warmth and constant motion. Swells travel in long lines from the Pacific, forming breaks along the beaches and wrapping around the Cape. Winds shift through the day, moving from calm mornings to gusty afternoons before settling again at dusk. The landscape shifts quickly as you approach, flat coastal ground giving way to rising rainforest, an air that grows heavier and more humid with each kilometer. Even before you reach the city, the tropics make themselves unmistakably known. In far north Queensland lies Cairns, positioned between the Coral Sea and the steep escarpments of the Great Dividing Range. The coastline here is shallow and tidal, with mudflats and mangroves stretching far from shore before dropping into deeper channels that lead toward the Great Barrier Reef. The reef itself sits offshore like a vast boundary, shaping the movement of currents and weather. The climate defines the rhythm of the region. The wet season brings intense rainfall, with clouds forming along the range and pushing storms toward the coast. The dry season clears the sky, revealing long views across the sea and a coastline lined with palms, creeks, and narrow beaches. The transition happens gradually. Towns grow sparse, vegetation lowers, and the land begins to stretch in every direction until distance becomes part of the atmosphere. By the time you reach the center, the desert feels like it has closed in around you. In the heart of Australia lies Alice Springs, set within the wide basin between the McDonnell Ranges. These ranges rise in long, broken ridgelines, their red quartzite cliffs catching light that shifts from orange to deep purple through the day. Gaps and gorges cut through the stone, formed by ancient rivers that once carved deep channels across the desert. The climate shapes daily life. Summers bring intense heat that settles over the plains, while winter mornings arrive cold and clear. Rainfall is rare, but when it comes, it can transform dry riverbeds into sudden flows that disappear almost as quickly as they appear. What first seems like a quiet stretch of coastline reveals its depth slowly. Bays, headlands, and wide plains meeting in a landscape shaped more by wind and water than by dramatic height. The city settles into this openness rather than rising above it. Southwest of Melbourne lies Geelong, positioned along the sheltered curve of Corio Bay. The shoreline forms gentle arcs with shallows that extend far from the coast before dropping into deeper channels. Piers, jetties, and marinas line the waterfront, reflecting the region's long connection to shipping, fishing, and trade. Inland, the land broadens into plains that run toward the volcanic fields of western Victoria. The climate carries a mix of coastal calm and inland change. Sea breezes push across the bay in the afternoons, while winter fronts arrive quickly, bringing sharp rain and shifting light. Suburbs extend across the flat ground, their streets following the natural rise toward low ridges that frame the city. The coastline shifts tone as you approach. Gentle bays on one side, exposed cliffs on the other, in a sense that the island holds two entirely different worlds, separated only by a narrow stretch of land. Its edges reveal their character, one turn at a time. South of Melbourne lies Phillip Island, surrounded by the waters of Western Port and Bass Strait. The northern shoreline stays calm, shaped by sheltered inlets, mangroves, and shallow beaches that change with the tides. To the south, the landscape turns sharper. Basalt cliffs rise above the ocean. Their dark columns cut into terraces where waves crash with steady force. The island's wildlife gives it a distinct rhythm. At dusk, little penguins return from the sea in small groups, crossing the sand to their burrows in the dunes. Out on the headlands, fur seals gather on rocky platforms, moving in and out of the surf through channels carved by centuries of water. The landscape rises almost without warning, flat country giving way to a high plateau, where the air feels cooler, clearer, and shaped by elevation rather than coast. From the rim of the range, the view drops away into a vast plain that seems to stretch without limit. Set on the crest of the Great Dividing Range lies Toowoomba, a city built along slopes and ridges overlooking the Darling Downs. Streets run across gentle highland contours, while parks and gardens fill pockets of land shaped by the cooler climate. The plateau collects mist in the mornings, drifting across rooftops before lifting to reveal wide open skies. The surrounding terrain changes quickly. To the east, the escarpment falls steeply into forested gullies, while to the west, the land settles into broad agricultural fields that extend for hundreds of kilometers. The contrast defines the region. Sharp drop on one side, open spread on the other. Nothing prepares you for the scale that rises from the desert floor. What first appears as a distant shape becomes a presence, solid, immense, and completely separate from the surrounding land. Even the light seems to behave differently around it. In Australia's red centre lies Uluru Kata National Park, home to two monumental formations shaped over hundreds of millions of years. Uluru stands as a single mass of sandstone, its walls curving upward in smooth, uninterrupted surfaces that change color with every shift of the sun. Deep grooves, pits, and overhangs mark the rock, formed by wind, water, and time. To the west, Kata rises in a cluster of massive domes, rounded forms made of conglomerate rock, linked by valleys and narrow passages. These spaces hold cooler air, with vegetation tucked between stone walls that tower above the desert. The landscape feels ancient long before you reach the town. Wide flats, broken mesas, and stretches of land so open that the horizon seems to pull everything outward. Nothing hides here, yet the sense of age is unmistakable. In western Queensland lies Wellington, set within a region shaped by the remnants of an inland sea that covered the area millions of years ago. The ground is hard and cracked in places, forming gibber plains that shimmer under the heat. Low jump-ups and tablelands rise abruptly from the surrounding flat country, their edges eroded into steps and ledges. The dry climate leaves the air clear and sharp. Summer heat settles over the land, while winter mornings arrive cold and bright. Creeks remain dry for much of the year, filling only after distant rains move through the Channel Country. Wellington's connection to deep time appears throughout the region. Dinosaur footprints lie preserved in ancient riverbeds, and the surrounding terrain holds layers of stone that record long-vanished ecosystems. At first, the landscape feels unusually ordered. Broad valleys, rounded hills, and open plains, arranged in a way that seems almost intentional. The quietness of the terrain stands out long before the city reveals itself. In southeastern Australia lies Canberra, set within a basin framed by the Brindabella Range and a series of low, forested hills. The city spreads across this landscape in carefully planned arcs and axes, its layout shaped by long lines of sight that connect water, parkland, and surrounding ridges. Lake Burley Griffin forms the centerpiece, a long artificial lake whose calm surface reflects both hills and skyline. The climate is sharply seasonal. Winters bring frost and cold winds that move down from the mountains, while summers fill the air with dry heat and intense light. Autumn casts the city in reds and golds, as tree-lined streets respond more like a cool climate town than its latitude suggests. Australia is vast, varied, and unlike anywhere else. Where ancient deserts meet tropical reefs, rainforests stretch to the sea, and cities rise beside coastlines shaped by wind and time. If this journey sparked your curiosity, hit subscribe. There are many more countries to explore right here on the channel.